Hello, seniors. How are you doing? How are your expectations about the vestibular and your preparation? I do believe in you and I'm anxious to see the results because I know you were good and you were doing your best. But let's go to our final activity. Can you see this image? What does it mean to you? We can see a question tag and a box over someone's head. What does it mean for us? Take a look at the following beliefs. Some are disappointing. A girl shouldn't say bad words. This is not okay for a lady. Just girls cannot say bad words? What about boys? Some Brazilian don't know Portuguese. They speak it all wrong. Women are not fit for certain jobs. They lack objectivity. Women are too sensitive for some things. Old people can't learn new things, but they can teach a lot. Those sentences are sometimes disappointing, and they reflect a word we are going to study in the beginning of this session. All the sentences we saw before reflect very rigid ideas that some people developed during history. They are part of something we call status quo. Let's watch a video to understand it better.
We make choices every day of our lives. Will I have toast or cereal for breakfast? Which route do I take to work today? A common assumption is that we make decisions based on our preferences. I like toast better than cereal, so that's what I'm going to have. We choose what we think will give us the greatest happiness, but what we decide is frequently influenced by seemingly trivial external or contextual factors. To demonstrate one such factor, we ran a live experiment at one of our School of Psychology Open Days. Visitors to the Open Day were invited to participate in a short experiment on decision-making and motor skill. We set up a carnival-style booth with a ball-throwing task. Volunteers had to try and throw a juggling ball into a pot from a 2-meter distance. To entice them to participate, we offered a chocolate reward if they scored. We told them that they could either throw with their dominant hand and win 1 chocolate bar, or throw with their non-dominant hand and win 2 chocolate bars. In economics terms, we therefore presented our volunteers with a choice between a low-risk, low-reward option, the dominant hand, and a high-risk, high-reward option, the non-dominant hand. But here's the twist. We randomly divided our participants into 2 groups or conditions. One group of participants were presented with the low-risk, low-reward option as the default, and the other with the high-risk, high-reward option as the default. The instructions for both groups were explained in a short video that participants watched before entering the throwing booth. Once they had heard the instructions, participants had to pick up a ball with either their dominant or non-dominant hand, depending on condition, and walk into the booth to take their throw. Before throwing, they were given a final choice: stay with whatever the default option was, or switch to the other hand. The question was whether people would make their decision based purely on a judgment of risk and reward, or whether the way the options were presented or framed would have an impact. Let's see what happened.
While we're waiting,
Do you want to stick with the left hand or switch to the right hand? If participants decided which hand to throw with based purely on a trade-off between risk and reward, we would expect that the high and low risk options would be chosen equally often in both groups. Well, that's not what we found. 191 people participated in total. Of the 98 people who walked in with the ball in their dominant hand, 75% stuck with that and did not choose to switch. Similarly, of the 93 people who walked in with the ball in their non-dominant hand, the majority, 62%, stuck with that and did not switch. So what happened? People tended to stay with whatever the default option was that had been presented to them. This is known as the status quo effect. People take the current position as their reference and evaluate decisions from that vantage point. So our volunteers didn't decide whether to throw with their dominant or non-dominant hand. Instead, they decided whether to give up one opportunity in exchange for another. People are reluctant to give up what they already have. This behavior fits with what we know from cognitive psychology about people assessing losses and gains differently. The potential loss associated with moving away from the default position was perceived as greater than the potential gain of switching to the other option. And that was true regardless of what the default option actually was. Utility companies, banks, and insurance providers can exploit this effect to their advantage. The way choices are presented to people, including the options which are marked as default, can have an enormous impact on the decisions people make. Another real-world example of the status quo bias is how options concerning organ donation are conveyed. Whether being a donor is presented as the default dramatically influences uptake rates.
Do you know what the worst thing, the absolute worst possible outcome that we can have is, Paul? That not enough people will come and participate and will be left with all this chocolate.
We live in an age of protest. On campuses, in public squares, on streets and social media, protesters around the world are challenging the status quo. Protests can thrust issues onto the national or global agenda. It can force out tyrants. It can activate people who have long been on the sidelines of civic life. But while protest is often necessary, is it sufficient? Consider the Arab Spring. All across the Middle East, citizen protesters were able to topple dictators. Afterwards, though, the vacuum was too often filled by the most militant and violent. Protest can generate lasting positive change when it's followed by an equally passionate effort to mobilize voters, to cast ballots, to understand government, and to make it more inclusive. So here are 3 core strategies for peacefully turning awareness into action and protest into durable political power. First, expand the frame of the possible. Second, choose a defining fight. And third, find an early win. Let's start with expanding the frame of the possible. How often have you heard, in response to a policy idea, "That's just never going to happen"? When you hear someone say that, they're trying to define the boundaries of your civic imagination. The powerful citizen works to push those boundaries outward, to ask, what if? What if it were possible? What if enough forms of power, people power, ideas, money, social norms, were aligned to make it happen? Simply asking that question, and not taking as given all the givens of conventional politics, is the first step in converting protest to power. But this requires concreteness about what it would look like to have, say, a radically smaller national government, or, by contrast, a big single-payer healthcare system. A way to hold corporations accountable for their misdeeds, or, instead, a way to free them from onerous regulations. This brings us to the second strategy, choosing a defining fight. All politics is about contrasts. Few of us think about civic life in the abstract. We think about things in relief, compared to something else. Powerful citizens set the terms of that contrast. This doesn't mean being uncivil. It simply means thinking about a debate you want to have on your terms over an issue that captures the essence of the change you want. This is what the activists pushing for a $15 minimum wage in the US have done. They don't pretend that $15 by itself can fix inequality, but with this ambitious and contentious goal, which they achieved first in Seattle and then beyond, they have forced a bigger debate about economic justice and prosperity. They've expanded the frame of the possible, Strategy 1, and created a sharp, emblematic contrast, Strategy 2. The third key strategy, then, is to seek and achieve an early win. An early win, even if it's not as ambitious as the ultimate goal, creates momentum, which changes what people think is possible. The Solidarity movement, which organized workers in Cold War Poland, emerged just this way. First with local shipyard strikes in 1980 that forced concessions. Then, over the next decade, a nationwide effort that ultimately helped topple Poland's communist government. Getting early wins sets in motion a positive feedback loop, a contagion of belief and motivation. It requires pressuring policymakers, using the media to change narrative, making arguments in public, persuading skeptical neighbors one by one by one. None of this is as sexy as a protest, but this is the history of the US civil rights movement, of Indian independence, of Czech self-determination. Not the single sudden triumph, but the long, slow slog. You don't have to be anyone special to be part of this grind, to expand the frame of the possible, to pick a defining fight, or to secure an early win. You just have to be a participant and to live like a citizen. The spirit of protest is powerful. So is showing up after the protest. You can be the co-creator of what comes next.
When we see something we don't agree, we have to learn how to express our opinions. I'm going to show you some very useful expressions to express your opinion in English. A manifesto is a good opportunity for you to show your opinions about a subject. When you manifest your opinion, you can use the sentences like we think, we believe, we feel, we would say, we will. When you are presenting a problem in your manifesto, you can use the problem is, the government says that, the group represents, the group has been, when you are talking about the group you are defending. When you are presenting solutions, I strongly believe, I truly feel, it's possible too. I hope I have helped you to express your feelings about social themes and subjects. Now it is time for you, in groups of 5 people, to write your manifest. You can choose the themes, but don't forget that your language must be respectful. Do not use bad words. You can manifest your ideas in a very polite way, and I believe you are going to do that. Hope to see your final project. Congratulations on your efforts. I'm so glad with you. See you next week.